There are very few things in watch collecting that consistently deliver that feeling. That moment where you stop, tilt your wrist, and just look down. Aventurine is one of those things. It's not traditional finishing. It's not hand engraving or englage. It's something different. It's emotional. It's atmospheric. And maybe most importantly, it is satisfying to look at. And that is what aventurine really does, is it helps you slow down. At a glance, looks like the night sky, but the more time you spend with it, the more you realize that every brand interprets this same idea completely differently. And that is what today is about. So we're talking about these four. We're going to talk about the Lange Saxonia Thin Copper Blue. We're going to talk about the Girard-Perregaux 1966 Orion, the Glashütte Original PanoMaticLunar Aventurine, and the Moser Endeavour Perpetual Moon Aventurine. Same material, completely different outcomes. So let's get into it. My name is James. I am a watch collector, a watch enthusiast, and advisor, and I am all about knowing and loving your watches. So that is what my goal is with this channel. Now, if you like this type of watch content, please do like and subscribe. I post every week. And as we get started here, let's do a quick wrist check. Today I am wearing my Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Moon Perpetual Enamel. It was a 2019 release, limited edition of 100 pieces, and it is one of the watches in my collection that I am just so fortunate to own because it is gorgeous and shares a lot of qualities along with the aventurine that we're going to talk about today. So let's dive into it. When you think about the satisfaction in watch collecting, Lange sits in a very specific place with this. It's not about making an impulse purchase or an impulse buy. It's not about even a trend. This is the kind of watch that you grow into as a collector. And to me, Lange, it really represents the peak of German watchmaking discipline. I've talked about that before with the movement finishing, where nothing is added until it earns its place. And the Saxonia line in particular is probably the cleanest expression of that philosophy. Time only on this, perfect proportions, no distractions at all. And when Lange decided to go and do aventurine with the copper blue, they didn't just source a slab of aventurine glass and call it a day. That's not how Lange does anything. They engineered their own interpretation of what aventurine is. So let's talk a little bit about how Lange makes their aventurine dial. I do want to cover this with each of the watches that we actually discussed today, because this is where it gets really interesting and very Lange to me in this conversation. Because instead of using a full aventurine glass disc, Lange actually starts out with a solid silver dial base. And on top of that, they then apply this specialized copper blue coating infused with metallic particles to replicate the goldstone effect. And that is a big deal. And we're going to talk about why that matters. For one, it allows for greater structural stability than brittle aventurine glass. And it also enables them to have a perfectly flat, very, very thin dial, which is critical for a 6mm case. Now, most importantly, it gives Lange complete control over the density and the distribution of the sparkle, is what we're going to call it, which, especially when you get it in the sunlight, is fantastic on any of these dials, but Lange in particular. So instead of a loud, high contrast type of star field effect that you do get with some watches, you get something that is much more restrained. And under soft lighting, it almost disappears into like a deep navy-ish kind of tone. When you get it in direct sunlight, the sparkle really comes out. But at the same time, it never overwhelms the watch, and that's what I appreciate about this here. I think this has the same characteristic as the little Lange, which also uses an aventurine dial. That restraint that you get with Lange watches when it comes to aventurine, that's the entire point of what they do well. Now let's talk about the technical specs a bit. So On this watch, you're looking at a 39 millimeter white gold case, so very wearable size. Again, you do have about a 6 millimeter thickness, which is very, very thin, partially because of the next point, which is it is a manual wind caliber L093.1. You do get a nice 72-hour power reserve and 30 meters of water resistance here. So splash resistant, very easy to wear casually. Obviously, you're not going to go swimming with this, but it wouldn't make sense to, so it's enough. And then if you flip the watch over, then you get some extra added satisfaction with this watch because you have the beautiful finishing that Lange does with that German silver 3/4 plate that covers most of the back of it. You have the hand-engraved balance bridge. You have the gold chaton cups. You have black polishing across multiple components. This is the type of movement that you don't get tired of looking at. So what I love about the Lange is that we're talking about aventurine today. And of course the dial is going to be a big component here, but with the Lange, I do think you get an equally interesting case back as well, and you get an open, display to view it through, which is super awesome. So any of these that you can get your hands on, the Saxonia is the one we're really focusing on. I do also love the little Lange as well. It's just so satisfying. This watch is not about trying to impress you immediately. It's the kind of piece that becomes more satisfying the longer you own it, and it's been talked about as one of the potentially up-and-coming trend watches just because they do the aventurine so well. That aventurine effect is definitely there, but it's controlled, it's intentional, and it is completely in line with Lange's philosophy, which, again, is just so thoughtful and well-engineered, and perfection is a word that comes to mind often in thinking about their philosophy. Now, let's move on to something that feels a lot more traditional, which I actually really like, and still incredibly satisfying in its own way. So we're going to talk about Girard-Perregaux with the 1966 Orion. And Girard-Perregaux is one of those brands that, I've talked about this before, does not always shout for attention, but when you spend time with it, you start to realize how much is there within the brand. It's not just Laureato. There is more to GP, and I really appreciate that as I've explored this brand more. Girard-Perregaux, they have a history that's rooted in chronometry, actually, precision, observatory trials, that kind of thing. That's part of what brought about the 1966 line of the watches. And this collection overall really reflects that whole heritage. So it is very clean, it is very balanced, and classically proportioned. One thing that I like about GP, we're going to talk about in a second, but the case to lug profile is extremely awesome with this watch. The 1966 has a 41 millimeter case and only a 44 roughly millimeter lug to lug, which makes it insanely wearable. Men's wrists, women's wrists, doesn't matter. Just makes it very easy to wear, and you get a great big dial, which is awesome. The Orion takes that classical foundation that Girard-Perregaux already has and introduces aventurine in a very pure form. Unlike Lange, GP uses true aventurine glass, which is also referred to as goldstone. The process itself is very delicate. So you have molten glass infused with copper crystals, and then that mixture is then cooled down very slowly so the crystals form evenly across the material. After that, then you have the material that gets cut into very thin discs, and that is where it gets kind of difficult to do because aventurine is very brittle. It is prone to cracking, and that makes it difficult to work with, difficult to machine. So the fact that they are able to do this, though in a very different way than Lange, is still impressive to me. And again, it's one of the things I appreciate about GP. So GP does go a little bit further here. They use a slightly domed dial, which means that the aventurine has to be shaped without getting fractured. So again, very challenging to do. And when they polish it, you have to maintain the integrity of the crystal distribution. That's a hard match to make. But the result is you have this dial that feels a little bit deeper and a little bit more dimensional than just a flat execution, because you have that slight curvature to the dome of the dial. Let's talk about the technical specs on this one. So again, 41 millimeter case. It does have a 9.5 millimeter thickness, so it is a pretty thin watch. Obviously not as thin as the Lange. It is automatic, so it's got the GP03300, which is a very robust movement. It has a 46-hour power reserve. You do get a time and date. The thing that I do like about the GP over the Lange is that you have center seconds. You've got some movement on the dial, and I do really like having that. The Lange, the only thing, as much aliveness as you get with it, it does feel a little bit dead on the dial just because you don't have any movement. Although, again, with the Aventurine and the way that they do it, it's hard to call it a dead dial. There's a whole lot of liveliness and depth to it, even without the center seconds. Again, you have a time and date here. You have 30 meters of water resistance, just like the Lange. So, again, splash resistant, but don't take it swimming here. And the reason to me that this one is satisfying, having owned it for probably about 6 months now, is this is where Aventurine feels very honest to me. You're getting very traditional Swiss watchmaking with Girard-Perregaux. You're getting a very familiar format of how you would expect a dress watch to look. And you have a dial that provides enough visual intrigue to kind of pull you in. It's a great date night watch. It's a great daily dress watch. It's a great formal watch. It does work in a lot of different settings, and it's not really trying to redefine anything. It just kind of works. And I like that, and sometimes that's exactly what you want in your collection. So from a price point perspective, at roughly maybe a third of the cost of the Lange, that's one reason that I think there are some points that go to Girard-Perregaux in this conversation. Let's move on to Glashütte Original PanoMaticLunar in Aventurine. Now we're going to move on to some higher price tiers, something a little more expressive. And that's what we're looking at here. So GO has always had a good balance of tradition with its technical identity. And the Pano collection is probably the clearest example of that. Of all of the watches that GO makes, I do have to say, even though I'm not big on the asymmetric dials, I do really like the look of the PanoMaticLunar. I think it's just interesting. There's some harmony to it, even though it's, again, asymmetric if you look at the whole thing. So you can easily recognize anytime you're looking at this type of dial, you immediately kind of see, okay, there's the recognizable off-center time display that they use. You have the panorama date. And then you also have that moon phase up at 2 o'clock, which is always, again, it's been kind of just, seems like it's kind of out there in its own little spot, but it works. Like, they've still found a way to balance the dial with it. And with the Aventurine dial version in particular that we're talking about today, this layout becomes more than just the design. It really becomes a great integration of those elements. Again, GO uses true Aventurine glass, but it's how they do it that makes it a little bit different. So they don't just apply it as a dial here, they build the entire visual system around it. When you look at the dial, there are these like open points in between things. Again, the moon phase is just like this open point at 2 o'clock that's off center from where the actual time and the small seconds dial is running. And the date is also just kind of in its own open space down at like 4 or 5 o'clock in there. So that's what I think is interesting about GO, is the way that they bring everything together. It's just kind of cool. Well, let's talk about the process here with this Aventurine on the GO. So it does involve cutting a main Aventurine dial disc, once again, similar to Girard-Perregaux. Then they separately produce a matching Aventurine moon phase disc. Now this I think is really cool. I've talked about my love for JLC and how they use Aventurine moon phase discs. GO also does it, and I think it's awesome. Then they carefully align both so that the textures complement each other. And this is more complex than it sounds because each piece of aventurine has a slightly different crystal distribution when you look at it, and matching them visually requires a level of selection and precision for both. Any mismatch between the two would immediately stand out and you would notice it pretty easily. So that's why I do really like the detail that goes into GO, and what you end up with is this kind of layered effect, this dial that has this wide kind of expansive star field that just feels like, again, it's not just where the time is, it just covers the whole dial. And then you have this moon phase, which is almost like a more concentrated, framed version of that same texture that's just stuck up there at 2 o'clock, and it looks really, really, really cool. Now, when we talk about the metals and some of the technical specs here, this is, again, different from the others. We're talking about a 40 millimeter platinum case, which is just epic, and I would love to hold one of these in the hand just to feel the heft of it. 12.8 millimeters thick, about 13 in thickness, so it is a little bit on the thicker side. Once again, you do have an automatic caliber. It's the 9214 automatic. You have a much, much higher power reserve at about 100 hours, and then you do have a moon phase that is accurate for 122 years. So I do think that that's a pretty awesome detail as well. And of course, like we mentioned, you have the panorama date, just kind of one of those classical qualities of German watchmaking, similar to Lange and the Lange 1, right? But GO does a good job of making it its own here. So why is this one so satisfying? To me, this watch gives you a little bit more to interact with than the prior two. So you're not just looking at the dial itself, you're also watching the progress of the moon phase. You're kind of finding the asymmetry of the dial and how it continually balances and unbalances itself over time. And you have this shift of aventurine across multiple surfaces. So again, it's not just the dial, you're also looking at the moon phase here, and the way that they make it is just fabulous. So it's definitely engaging without being overwhelming. This is still somewhat of an understated piece, though in platinum, but the white metal on the dark dial does make it look very understated in my opinion. And that balance that it has, to me, is what makes it satisfying long term. Now, we're going to get onto something completely different once again, because we are going to talk a little bit about Moser and the Endeavour Perpetual Moon Aventurine. Now, Moser is one of the few brands that feels truly modern in that sense of the word, not because of the materials necessarily or the technology of it, but more so because of the mindset and the things that they strip down off the watch that don't need to be there. With this aventurine piece, they kind of take that idea to its extreme. So let's talk about how Moser makes their aventurine dial. Moser also uses true aventurine glass, but the focus here is on purity. So what they tend to do is they select aventurine with extremely fine, evenly distributed metallic inclusions, and their whole goal, dial, not just aventurine, but all their watches, is minimal visual interruption. Like, you just have a clean looking dial to the point where, again, they don't even put the logo on there in a lot of cases. So once they do that, then they cut it into a clean, uninterrupted dial surface. They don't have indices. Like I said, they don't even use the logo on many versions of this. And they do let the material speak entirely on its own. So that's the thing that I think distinguishes Moser, is whereas the other brands try to add some details on top of or kind of integrate them within the aventurine dial, Moser takes a whole different approach completely and just leaves the aventurine dial to speak for itself. And that also has its own merits. It's pretty cool. I gotta say, it takes a while for me to warm up to Moser just because I'm used to having all those things on the dial. But there are some dials that I've really come to like because of what I just talked about. So all of this that they have to do requires an extremely high quality aventurine selection. So again, a lot of it comes down to the selection, how it's cut, how they work with it in terms of machining to make sure that those imperfections don't show up because there's really nowhere to hide imperfections if they were there. Technically, I guess you have the moon phase and the cannon pinion, and that's about it. That's all you got. For the moon phase itself, the disc is oversized and pretty highly detailed. It's also engineered for extreme accuracy here. We're talking about 1 day deviation in over 1,000 years with the moon phase. So Moser has its own excellence that it strives for, and I appreciate that about Moser. Now, when you're talking about the technical specs of this one, it does have a 42 millimeter case, so a little bit larger than some of the prior ones that we've looked at. It is a manual wind, the HMC 801. It's got a 7-day power reserve, so plenty of power reserve for a manual watch. And then a perpetual style moon phase. Again, 1 day of deviation in over 1,000 years. That's a lot of accuracy to have with a moon phase. Now, why this one is satisfying in my view is this is possibly the most immersive experience of the four, because again, they have no distractions on this dial. There's no clutter. There's just, you have the light, you have the depth, and then you have motion. It's that kind of watch where you check on the time and then forget to look away because you just are staring into the depth of space that really shows up on all these Aventurine dials, but particularly with the Moser because there's nothing else to look at. It's just the Aventurine, and I appreciate that about it. So now that we've broken each watch down individually, let's step back a bit and compare them directly. So as far as the design philosophy goes, Lange being our first one, you have that disciplined minimalism to Lange. They just don't add any bells and whistles. It's just what they need to create a great looking dial. Girard-Perregaux, you have that classical balance to it. Again, tradition in the watchmaking there, and you get a lot of that heritage that comes with the 1966 Orion line, 1966 line in general. Then GO, you have more technical expression, how they bring everything together on the dial, including some of the complications with the Aventurine. And then with Moser, you just have that reduction down to emotional expression with the dial. And I think that's beautiful. So that's kind of the design philosophy there. As far as the Aventurine execution, Lange has, again, this subtle, controlled, almost hidden aspect of it where they're creating it like enamel. GP and GO and Moser, they're all using true Aventurine here. But again, they have slightly different executions of it where the GP is a little more traditional, more dial focused. GO has it integrated with the complications. Moser is more dominant and immersive in terms of what you get with the dial. From a technical standpoint, kind of the hierarchy here, definitely your simplest would be your Lange, just the time only. The GP is a little bit of a step up. You have a time and date there, and you also have a moving seconds. Then you get up to the more complex with the Glashütte Original, moon phase, and panorama date. And then lastly, you have the Moser with a super, super precise perpetual moon. And that is just one of the coolest features on the Moser that they're able to make that happen. Now, from a wearability perspective, let's talk about that. The best pure dress watch, I would have to say Lange wins on this one. It's hard to beat it. It's just so simple and very minimal, and it's great. Now, the most versatile of the bunch, I definitely think goes to the GP. Again, with just the different elements that they have. They also have this nice little quarter indice setup, and then the other indices are basically painted on, essentially. So that's GP. Most substantial watch for sure is going to be the GO with a platinum case and just everything you get with the dial. And then the most modern presence, of course, would go to Moser. There's no question about that. So from a collector perspective, in terms of who is going to buy these watches, Lange typically is going to be your finishing purists. Like all they care about is finishing. They just want everything finished to the highest level. Definitely Lange is going to win the battle there. GP is going to be more of your traditional and classical collectors. I kind of, to some regard, put myself into that category, not just because I have this watch, but I do like having those classical elements in there. GO, you have a little bit more of your complication enthusiasts there. There's just more there. And then the Moser, definitely folks who are geared more towards independent, design-driven collecting. So when you step back and look at all four, what's interesting is not necessarily which one is the best, because that's going to really depend on what type of collector you are, but it's more how they approach the exact same material and the exact same type of watch very differently. And as a collector, what matters is not just what the watch does on paper, it's how it feels after you've had it for a week, after you've had it for a month or a year. And Aventurine is one of those rare types of dials that just continues to deliver over time in a consistent way. It's not flashy, it just gives you something new to notice every time the light hits it differently. And ultimately, that is what makes the watch satisfying, is being able to get multiple experiences from it. Now, if you enjoyed this podcast, this is exactly what this channel is about. It's about finding watches that don't just impress at first glance, but hold up over time. The goal is not just to collect, it's to be truly satisfied with what you own. So if you liked this one, definitely take a look at one of my other recent podcast episodes where I talk about 5 luxury watches with the best movement finishing in watchmaking, and a couple of these brands are also featured in that video as well. So thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. I hope you liked the video. Click that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye-bye.